Hi, hello, welcome. This is the LUS of STEM After School Club, and this is the Paper Plane Challenge. My name's Ava. I'm a second year product design engineering student at Loughborough University. Product design engineering is a mix between design, mechanical engineering, manufacturing engineering, and any kind of physics and maths. And this is Eleanor. She's a third year aeronautical engineer.
Hi, I do aeronautical engineering, and that is just essentially making planes and everything to do with them, but it's really heavily based on just general basic mechanical engineering as well. So it's a really good subject, nice and broad, even if it doesn't sound it. And I'm currently on placement, which is great.
That's what I love about my course. It's so broad, so you can do everything. So one day you'll do calculations, the next day you'll be doing hand sketches, next day you'll be doing some prototyping in the workshop. There's such a range of tasks. I just love it. I wouldn't be doing anything else. So Helenor's going to talk you through the four forces of flight, and we've got a diagram that we'd like to show you.
Thanks. So essentially, there are four forces acting on any airplane that's in flight. So some of them are really obvious, like weight, and that's something you can't change unless you get rid of stuff. So often that's burning fuel. Another big one is lift. So that's what actually makes it go up into the air and keeps it there. The other ones are thrust. So that's the force that you get from your engines, or in our case of a paper plate, and that's the force of you throwing it. And the last one is drag, and that acts again backwards on the aircraft. And that's any sort of air resistance that you get. So anything like if you were riding a bike and you're going faster, you'll feel more pushed towards you with the air. And that's essentially the basics of it. So what we want to do with our paper airplane is we want to try and decrease the drag as much as possible. So then that way there's the least amount of resistance. We want to give it the biggest thrust we can. So when you throw it, you want to throw it as hard as you can. But you may want to play around with that. Again, we're making it out of paper, so that means that our weight is really low, which helps. And finally, lift is something we want to try and increase as much as possible. So that's going to be largely due to the shape of your paper plane, but it will also depend on things like whether you throw it upwards or you throw it downwards, or what we like to call angle of attack.
And there's different kinds of aircraft in the world. So you have your commercial aircraft, you have military aircraft, and I've got two examples I'd like to show you. One, they're both, I'd say, commercial aircraft, and one's called the Airbus Beluga, which is this one. It's used for transporting Airbus parts that Airbus uses to transport fuselages of smaller aircraft, other parts of smaller aircraft. As you can see, it's not the most streamlined aircraft, so it will have a very high coefficient of drag, meaning that it needs a lot of power, a lot of thrust to keep it in the air. It can't fly as fast as other aircraft, and it's certainly heavier than a lot of other commercial aircraft in the skies, but it still works and it still manages to fly because all these forces are balanced out. The next example is Concorde. This was a plane that was designed in the 60s and flew from 1974 to 2003 commercially with British Airways and Air France. And it's a very smooth, streamlined shape, meaning that it was able to fly at twice the speed of sound. So that's Mach 2. It's as I said earlier, it's smooth, it's streamlined, so it almost had a bullet-like shape, which enabled it to go this fast, and its engines produced high amounts of thrust, which allowed it to go as fast as it could.
Okay, so what you want to do is start with any piece of paper, probably A4 size is best, but whatever you have lying around is fine. So first of all, you're going to be wanting to take your paper and fold it in half lengthways, so like this. You do that. And you want to make sure that you press the crease down nicely and it's nice and straight. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is when we open it up, we're going to fold in the top corners into the center line like this. And you want to do that on both sides into the crease.
And it ends up looking something like this, doesn't it?
Might want to use thin paper for this, like printer paper. Okay.
That's what I've done.
Yeah. So the next thing we do is, once we have them like this, is we're going to fold the whole thing over. So it's going to end up looking like that. And now it's going to be looking a little bit like an envelope. And the next thing we want to do is sort of, you need to guess where, but I'd probably leave cut not more than 2 centimeters each side. So you're going to take it from the center line, make sort of a note of where that is, and you want to bring it into the center. Now what you want to do is make sure that both parts touch. So you want to have even on both sides. So it touches in the center like that, and make nice neat folds.
Something like this.
That's great.
You can use your nail on the folds to make them really sharp.
Okay, so once we have it like that, you're going to have this little bit of a triangle here. And so what you're going to want to do is flip that upwards, make a fold there. Okay, so the next step is to turn it over to this side, and you want to fold in half. So what you're going to want to do is fold it in half so that these edges are then on the outside, like that. So at this point, it should be more looking like an airplane, paper airplane. And the next step after that is to fold the wings down. So you want to just grab each side and fold it down pretty much however big of a wing you like. Have a look, play around, see which wings work best. And then again on the other side. And the next step is more of something to do to add a bit of stability to it. So it's sort of optional, but what you can do is you can fold the little bit of the wingtips up on each side, and just a little bit.
And what do winglets actually do on aircraft, like in real life then?
So they're really carefully designed. They sort of, you wouldn't necessarily think about it, but there's lots of things. So on our airplanes, we have thin wings, and they're very flat and thick as a piece of paper. But if you're actually designing a wing, you'd have lots of different shapes, and the shapes is what determines how much lift it has. So some wings that you have for like a slow aircraft, they're nice and rounded on the edge, and they've got a nice big arch. And what the arch does is make sure that air going over the top is faster than the air underneath, and that's what generates the lift. But then there's some really weird stuff that happens when it goes supersonic, and that means that sometimes the wings look really weird and angled, and that somehow helps with different things like shock waves. So there's actually lots of stuff that happens with the wings, but a general rule of thumb is that if the wing is long and thin, then it's probably going to go slower, but it's going to generate lots and lots of lift. So things like paper airplanes are a bit what we call gliders, and that's something that's like an aircraft without any engine, and that purely works on just finding rising hot air columns, and it generates lift from there without any engine, which is pretty cool. But then if you were to look at something like a fighter aircraft that has really short and fat wings, and what that does is makes sure that you can really maneuver very, very quickly, and it's really agile. So it's really dependent on what kind of aircraft you have, what type of wing you have, but it's definitely a huge part of it. So this aircraft, paper airplane, has probably quite small wings to what you'd normally think, but I don't know. We'll have to see which one works best.
So the next aircraft we're going to be making is slightly more complex than that one, but I will talk you through it. Again, you need an A4 sheet of paper. I'm just using printer paper. It's thin and it's very easy to work with. So the first thing you want to do is take the top corner and fold it down to form a triangle, and then press down flat. And then you want to crease it really well, and then you want to open it again. So use your nail or something along the side and just makes a nice satisfying sound, and then open it up and do the same thing to the other side. Again. And then you're left with this, this X shape. And the next thing you're going to do is called an accordion fold. So it's a little bit more complex, and I will explain it. So just take your fingers in between the two corners at the top and fold it down to make a triangle. And then press that flat as well.
I find that bit quite difficult.
It is a bit tricky. It is a bit tricky. Take your time. It's just a bit strange, if I'm honest, but it works. So best thing is just to bring the top down, and hopefully it will automatically crease by itself, and then you can just crease it with your fingers and it'll be easier. Then the next step is to fold over one flap of paper. So you're left with just this part of your paper airplane, so just this part, and you want to fold this in toward the center, and then repeat that on the other side.
I don't know if anyone else has issues doing that with needing more than two hands, but what I did was I had it facing towards me like this, with the crease and the open fold, and then where you want to be pulling the paper back in, instead of doing it inwards, I had flipped the paper over and made a crease. So it creases like this, and then what you want to do is flip it back around the other way so it sits more neatly like that. Might be helpful.
That's a really good idea. And in the end, it should look something like this. You've got your big flappy triangle at the top and your smaller ones all folded in, like so. The next thing you want to do is take these small the sides of the big triangle and fold them up towards the top to make a square. It will look like this. How's yours going?
Oh, I'm a bit behind, but yeah, it could be on.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yeah, I'm on the same bit.
Okay. All great. All good. All good. How did you decide that you wanted to do aeronautical engineering then, whilst we're waiting?
Oh, a good question. So I guess I've always been interested in aviation. I was a big air cadet. But what really drew me to engineering wasn't sort of like a, typical, oh, I love building. It was just more of, looking at what I was good at. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to university. So I sort of looked through all the courses and realised that what I was actually good at was quite good at maths, and I really loved science. But I didn't love science as mixing chemicals so much. I really liked physics, and I really wanted to do something that wasn't just necessarily, all paperwork based or, thinking. I really wanted to be doing something. And because that sort of led me into engineering, and I thought, well, I don't really want to do necessarily something so broad. I really want to specialise. So then that's when I settled on Loughborough. So they had a really good course, and yeah, now it's history. How about you?
Sounds great. Rest is history. Sorry?
Yeah. And how about you? How did you get into your course?
Oh, okay. Okay, so I've always loved aircraft. I used to go plane spotting as a child, and when I was very little, it used to be to see Concorde. So I mentioned Concorde earlier on, and that's what inspired me to go into engineering. I love seeing how aircraft work and how they fly and why things are done in certain ways. And then at A level, I took design and technology and got really into it. And I didn't want to leave that behind, but I still wanted to do something engineering based. So I chose product design engineering because it's a really great mix between the two. And I said earlier, one day you'll be doing calculations, and the next, not even a day, in one session will you be doing calculations, and the next you'll be doing some drawings or creative thinking. And it's a really nice balance between everything. And I absolutely love my course. And so the rest is history. Anyway, so it should now look like this. You have a flappy square at the top. And what you want to do is fold in these bottom edges. I'll fold in so you can see properly. And so that's one side done. Just take that side, fold it in, and do the same to the other side. So a lot of what we're doing is making it symmetrical, but this should result in a good aircraft. It should look like so.
Yep.
Okay, now the next part is a little bit tricky. So at the top you've got this two flaps, and then you've got this big triangle. And what you want to do is fold the big triangle back, but leave the two flaps at the front, so that it looks something like this, and you've got your two flaps there. And the next part is even more tricky, which I found when I was making this the first time. So if you flip it back over, you have your flaps, and then if you flip it to the top view, you have the flaps you folded in earlier, but there's a little gap between them. And what you want to do is put these flaps into that hole over there, so that it's a really nice clean edge.
Mine's not greatly folded, but it should look like this. And this is the little flap that you'll be putting in. So there's this should be more of a triangle, but you get the idea where it slots into there.
It's a bit of a tricky stage. It requires you to be quite delicate, so you don't like rip the paper, because I did that a little while ago when I was doing some other origami, and I ripped the paper, which I was really devastated about. So you don't want to rip the paper now.
It can be really tricky not to. I find that sometimes your folds just don't go quite right, and once one goes, everything from then is not great.
Or you've made one wrong fold and then have to start again. That's bad. Okay, so now that's all tucked in. What you want to do is take the front side that you've been folding in, and then fold it in half, like so. And now it definitely looks more like your typical paper plane. If I put the hand behind it, you can probably see it better. So now it looks more like your typical paper plane. And then you want to take your wings and fold them out. It's a little bit difficult at the front because at the front is quite thick now. So it needs to be a little bit delicate. It's a bit of a delicate work there, but it should be fine. Not what you should be saying as engineers, it should be fine, but never mind.
Well, I find that's something that's quite, I know, quite often you find that things in engineering aren't really as precise as you think. Obviously, there's lots of stuff you have to be really orientated, but then there's a lot of things that happen, and it's more just, it's the process, you know. It's when you're in the working world, you are sort of just making sure everything's as good as it needs to be, but not putting so much effort into it that it costs so much, or, you know, weighs too much. And all these things come into it, and, you know, if it works, then it works, you know. You don't need to go any further than that. So that's really been a really interesting thing that I've learned whilst being on placement.
Yeah. What I actually quite like about engineering is that a lot of the time you do a lot of experiments to find out new things. So you might do some destructive testing to see how a certain joint works, or you might try out a few different ways of making something and then destructively test it to see which one was the best. I like, as you can tell, I quite like destroying things, so it's fun. But it's a really interesting field to be in, and you can apply your knowledge that you've built up in a classroom, and you can see how it's applied to the real world, and it's something that just opens your eyes to everything, really. And eventually, at some point, I'll be able to look at something and say, I know how that was made, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Or being able to look at something and say, I did that, or that was my work, or I did those calculations. It's always quite fun. Okay, so your plane should be looking something like this now. You've got a small triangle here, big triangle here, and then you have these two flaps. And what you want to do is push one of them down and bring one of them up.
It looks like so. This.
Ooh. Zoom doesn't want to cooperate with us today, does it?
No,
yeah, that's the end of the paper. No, it doesn't. It's just a background thing, I think. But this is paper plane number 2 done. So we're only running through these two. So if you'd like to go and throw your paper plane now, and try and throw them both. Throw them both and try and throw both of them with the same amount of force, and try and see which one lands. Maybe do a best of 3 and see which one lands the furthest as an average, and think about it. Why do you think it would have done that? And then come back and join us again.
So now that you've thrown them both, and hopefully you did it at different, you know, threw them both, but do it lots of times to see, does it land further away if you throw it more upwards, or if you throw it downwards, or more straight, or how hard you throw it, like really gently or not. So I've done some of my own, I've tested mine, and what I found is actually this first design is quite good. And I don't know if you can look at both of mine and see, you know, one has a much larger wingspan than the other, and a lot more area. So ultimately what I think has happened is that this larger area on this wing has meant that there's more air traveling over it, which creates more lift. So therefore it's going to stay in the air longer. I don't know what you guys found.
That sounds good. It sounds quite right, to be honest. I'm sure it is. So that wraps up the paper plane challenge. I hope you really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching it. And I hope you learned a little bit about aircraft. And if you found this really interesting, maybe you can consider a career in aerospace engineering, aeronautical engineering, or even do something like me and do design engineering. Thanks for watching. Bye.